and role model.
You kind of liken him to Forrest Gump, the kid that couldn't but did, and ultimately took over and won.
But he also has a dark side, plagued by an assault allegation, an intense fascination with guns, and what many describe as a violent temper.
He was apparently a bit controlling, a bit jealous. You could see that they had some very intense arguments.
It all comes to a head during the wee hours of Valentine's Day 2013, when Oscar shoots and kills his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp.
I will never forget that moment. It was early hours of Valentine's Day. I got a phone call saying that Reeva was dead.
In South Africa, an average person who admitted to fatally shooting his girlfriend would be looking at a mandatory life sentence. But Pistorius is beloved by the public and comes from a wealthy and powerful family.
It's clear Pistorius was treated differently. He was treated differently from the very beginning.
He uses stacks of cash from lucrative endorsement deals to mount a very public and costly campaign for freedom.
Criminal justice looks very different for the rich and wealthy.
It works, and in the end, Oscar Pistorius, the fastest man with no legs, is rich and acquitted of murder in the first degree. For most couples, Valentine's Day is a time to celebrate love, commitment, and romance. But February 14th, 2013 was anything but celebratory for global track and field phenom Oscar Pistorius and his stunning model girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp. They seem to have it all: beauty, fame, money, and new love. And though the two have only been dating for 3 months, they are an it couple and media favorite.
They seem to have gotten very close very quickly, but there's quite a bit of controversy. Reeva was concerned about Oscar's temper.
According to Pistorius' account, at approximately 3 a.m., he is startled out of his sleep. Oscar grabs a gun and makes his way to the source of the noise that awoke him, the bathroom. He fears an intruder has broken in. Without pause, he fires 4 shots through the closed door.
It was only after that he discovered, going back into the bedroom, that Reeva wasn't there, and he put it all together and realized that it was her in the bathroom.
Pistorius seeks help and tries to save Steenkamp, but it's too late. When news spreads that the famous athlete has shot and killed his girlfriend, the public is shocked.
When South Africa woke up on Valentine's Day to this news that golden boy Oscar Pistorius had shot and killed Reeva, it was a mix of disbelief, uncertainty, and really shock.
After all, Oscar is a global hero to many and has spent his life overcoming insurmountable odds.
Oscar was always destined for greatness. There was just always something very special, something very different about Oscar Pistorius, and we like to claim him as a South African, but he was truly an international superstar.
Pistorius was born in the Johannesburg suburb of Sandton in 1986 with a congenital condition called fibular hemimelia, an absence of fibula bones in both legs. When Oscar is just 11 months old, his parents make the heart-wrenching decision to have both legs amputated below the knee.
And I think there was something in the drive of him and his mother, perhaps the weight of that decision on her shoulder, to prove to the world that her son could do and would do better than any others. So I think in a way it almost pushed her to push him.
Particularly in poverty-stricken South Africa, most children would have to make do with typical prosthetics. But the Pistorius family is wealthy and have the means to get Oscar fitted with the best prosthetics money can buy. In his life, disability will be no obstacle to success. Young Oscar embraces his biggest challenge and becomes a track star, adding to the already illustrious Pistorius name, which is well known as one of South Africa's wealthiest clans.
Pistorius family is definitely wealthy. They're business people. All the Pistorius brothers are involved in business, so they are definitely one of South Africa's wealthier families.
Oscar Pistorius' family is rich. His extended family have significant business interests in a variety of industries.
Oscar's mother, Sheila Pistorius, passes on the grit and determination that Oscar brings to the field. She champions his athletic pursuits early on and is responsible for his tough mental conditioning.
His mother passed away when he was a teenager, and he does not have as much contact with that side of the family.
He started out as a teenager. He set Paralympic world records back in the 2004 Paralympic Games. He was still in school. He was 17 years old. And from there, he had massive success building up to the 2008 Paralympic Games in Beijing, where he won everything.
What a performance from Oscar Pistorius!
But Oscar is also embroiled in controversy.
There was a time there where the International Olympic Committee wouldn't let him compete in the able-bodied games because they felt it gave him an unfair advantage.
His extensive resources allow him to mount a public campaign against the ban. Being from a powerful family with influence has its privileges, and after a highly publicized fight, the ban is overturned.
I think it made it a real spectacle as well. Here was this guy who didn't look like anybody, didn't move like anybody, didn't run like anybody, and now running off his prosthetic blade in that famous now J shape, it really did look like blades on the track.
Fast forward to 2012, when Oscar, also deemed the fastest man with no legs, stands center stage in front of the world at the 2012 Olympic Summer Games. Although he has already earned dozens of medals and broken records over the years, as the first double amputee in Olympic history, the handsome Pistorius can now cash in on his newfound global fame.
Sponsorships came pouring in. I mean, you know, corporate South Africa and corporate international brands already wanted to be a part of this Oscar Pistorius blade running machine. And because he was the full package, he was a very good-looking man, he was still very young, he was very successful. Here he was blurring those lines between the two. He was the complete marketing package.
Public Oscar was very heavily into his charity work, promoting disability awareness, and essentially trying to appear as this hero.
Oscar has carved out his own success independent of his family's wealth. With his new income comes new toys, a luxury condo, and expensive sports cars. The bachelor athlete takes to the party circuit like he was born for it. But beneath his sterling facade lurks a rumored dark side. Until now, only seen privately by select members of his inner circle.
Oscar Pistorius's propensity for the good life. He was very much painted as a playboy, someone who drove too fast, was reckless with guns, and thought he was above the law.
In 2009, Oscar's temper allegedly got the better of him when he reportedly angrily hit a door, pushing it into and injuring a female house guest.
But I think because of his fame, his celebrity, his wealth, his family name, it afforded him special treatment. With police, with legal matters, he seemed to skirt a way around the law.
Despite a police investigation, no charges were filed.
It's clear Pistorius was treated differently. He was treated differently from the very beginning. He was a high-profile celebrity, not only in South Africa, but worldwide.
Oscar burned candles on both ends, training hard on the track by day and partying even harder well into the night. As a playboy on the nightclub circuit, Oscar is often known to have a drink in his hand and a beautiful woman on his arm. It is in November of 2012 that he meets a beautiful young model and aspiring actress, Reeva Steenkamp.
Do I prefer a clean-shaven man or the rugged camel man? I think I would go for the rugged guy.
She appears to be the perfect match for Pistorius and his ego.
She's known as somebody who was kind, loving, gentle. She was involved in some work with women who had been abused. She was working to assist women to get out of relationships like those. And even though she did the rounds on the party scene, she was definitely not known as a party girl. She was a law graduate.
But her relationship takes a tragic turn when she is gunned down by her boyfriend. Was it a horrible accident or cold-blooded murder in the aftermath of a fight? Oscar Pistorius's freedom hinges on that very question. Famed athlete Oscar Pistorius and international model Reeva Steenkamp first crossed paths in November 2012 when they are set up by a mutual friend in Johannesburg. Reeva has just graced the cover of FHM magazine, and Oscar, smitten at first sight, asks her to be his date for the South African Sports Awards.
When Oscar Pistorius saw something he wanted, he made sure he got it, whether it was an Olympic medal or Reeva Steenkamp.
He had these two very different personalities, the established celebrity, fast cars, this gun culture that he was very much in love with, and on his arm, this beautiful blonde woman who was still on her way up in her career.
Reeva and Oscar are the seemingly perfect pair. Both are famous, good-looking, and share an affinity for horseback riding and adrenaline-fueled car racing.
They seem to have had a good relationship. They seem to have gotten very close very quickly.
They also share a common fear of falling victim to violence in Johannesburg. Reeva was once robbed in Port Elizabeth, and Oscar, a very wealthy celebrity, is concerned about the rampant crime rate as well. Oscar develops what some worry is an obsession with guns. He buys several firearms, including 2 shotguns, a semi-automatic assault rifle, and a pistol.
With such a high crime rate in South Africa, it really isn't that out of place that you would have a firearm next to the bed for personal protection.
This obsession previously caused problems on a night out with Reeva and friends when Oscar is admiring his pal's gun and accidentally fires it in a crowded restaurant.
The incident at Tasha's restaurant would be another example of where a person who discharges a firearm in a negligent way or discharges a firearm where it endangers the life of somebody else would result, if not in a criminal charge, it would have resulted in this inquiry. It's amazing, in retrospect, that no such inquiry took place, that no criminal charge was laid.
I think he was a thrill seeker, a danger seeker, someone who got off on being involved in highly risky behavior. And again, he got away with it, so there were never any consequences to his actions.
It's not Oscar's only issue handling weapons. His ex-girlfriend, Samantha Taylor, also recalls once being a passenger in the car when Oscar is stopped by police. When the officer notices Oscar is in possession of a gun, he takes it from Oscar, empties it, and hands the gun back with just a warning. Although Oscar seemingly received preferential treatment from the officer, he is enraged about the confrontation.
As they were stopped at the stop sign, he was so aggravated and so annoyed by the fact that he'd been pulled over by the police that he fired a gun through the sunroof, I mean, literally inches from her head.
These stories started emerging about Oscar Pistorius, somebody who had this fetish for firearms, who was reckless, enjoyed wild parties, and, as it emerged, somebody who allegedly fired his firearm out the roof of a car and had this fascination with firearms.
On the surface, Oscar's relationship with Steenkamp appears to be much different than with Samantha Taylor, who describes Oscar as having frequent, angry, possessive rages. Oscar's courtship with Reeva plays out in the media, and they both appear to be the power couple of South Africa.
It was an interesting relationship. It did appear that Oscar Pistorius was very much in love with his girlfriend. You could see this in the text messages that were sent between them. There was obviously the ups and downs where they did appear to have fights. There were some times when Reeva felt particularly hurt by comments and actions that Oscar Pistorius had done to her. But it does appear that they were a couple who were quite happy and in love.
Although publicly enthralled, Reeva's mother later makes a stunning posthumous confession about the couple's closeness. Despite dating for several months, she insinuates Reeva and Oscar were not yet intimate.
Reeva Steenkamp's mother says to this day that the couple had not slept together, but we will never know. We don't all tell our mothers everything.
According to Mrs. Steenkamp, Reeva was unsure about taking the relationship to the next level, but no one knows for sure.
I do know from the perspective of Reeva, she was not the kind of person to get into a relationship without evaluating the potential of a long-term engagement, be it resulting in marriage.
Oscar, who always seems to exude confidence on the track, appears to be the polar opposite in his relationships. According to court records, he is often seen as jealous and controlling.
Reeva was concerned about Oscar's temper. There was one WhatsApp message where she told him that he scares her sometimes because he snaps at her. There were also messages where she seemed to be unhappy that he was jealous of her. He seemed to be unhappy that she was talking to other men.
He was apparently a bit controlling, a bit jealous, and they took their text messages and presented pretty much all of them to the court. I mean, there were hundreds, and I'd say maybe 95% of them, they seemed very normal for a young couple, sort of in love, newish relationship. But then there were some that took a bit of a darker turn. You could see that they had some very intense arguments.
After just 2 months, is Reeva and Oscar's love fest subsiding? There is evidence that the couple were sharing text messages with former lovers, and yet the two had special plans for Valentine's Day and the night prior.
It seems that Reeva Steenkamp spent the previous night at Pistorius' house. In the morning he left, he had some meetings, she left, went home, returned at about 6 o'clock on the evening of the 13th of February.
Ironically, the night before her death, on the eve of Valentine's Day, Reeva would retweet support for victims of domestic violence.
You could say it's a little serendipitous, but perhaps Reeva, we'll never know, had that gut instinct that something was going to happen.
Her private texts would later come to light, providing prosecutors with ammunition to show that Reeva may have been shot following an argument, casting doubt on Oscar's intruder story. For South Africa's it couple, global track star Oscar Pistorius and international model Reeva Steenkamp, February 13th, 2013 is an ordinary night. Valentine's Day is soon approaching, and the couple decides to have a quiet evening at Oscar's luxury condo, away from the glaring spotlight they usually attract. Things seem good.
She prepared dinner and they had a meal together, after which they retired to his bedroom.
In South Africa, it's the dead of summer, and according to Oscar, that night the heat is unbearable. He gets out of bed to turn on a fan, then quickly falls back asleep.
Pistorius said Reeva was still awake. She was busy on the computer, surfing a bit. He went to sleep, and it was a very hot night. The doors to the balcony were open. The bedroom is on the second story of the house. He says he woke up somewhere in the early hours of the morning. He doesn't know what woke him up. When he woke up, he looked at Reeva next to him. He realized that the doors to the balcony were still open.
According to his own testimony, Oscar is startled awake by a noise inside of his condo. Too rattled to turn on the lights or slip on his prosthetic legs, he grabs a 9mm pistol and heads to the bathroom, the source of the noise.
He says he thought straight away that someone must have come in through the window because Reeva was in bed. He had just had a conversation with her a short while ago. At that stage, he moved to get his gun, which was in the bedroom. He was also on his stumps at the time. He says he walked towards the bathroom and he heard the window of the bathroom slam.
It was when he heard that noise coming from inside and seeing an open window next to the actual toilet cubicle, that was when he fired. And he fired 4 times into that bathroom door. It was only then that he claims to have realized exactly what had happened and that it was possible that Reeva was inside.
After Oscar unloads, he allegedly shouts out for Reeva to call the authorities. But when he gets no response, Oscar is stricken by a horrifying thought. Where is Reeva?
He broke down the door with a cricket bat, and it was then that he discovered her. Apparently still breathing. He ultimately picked her up and took her downstairs to his home's foyer. And it was at that point where neighbors had started to arrive. They had apparently heard shouts and screams.
Reeva lays on the floor, having suffered multiple gunshot wounds. most notably to her head. She is barely alive when Oscar carries her bloody body down his staircase. A doctor who lives in the upscale complex comes to Reeva's aid, but it is too late. She dies in the hallway of Oscar's home.
There was some testimony from neighbors claiming that they had heard a woman screaming prior to the shots, implying that the couple was having an argument and that Oscar may have shot Reeva in anger.
A critical question will soon be the source of much controversy. Did the screams neighbors heard come before or after Steenkamp was shot?
Depending on if you ask the state, it could have been prior to the shooting, and depending if you ask the defense, it was after the shooting, Oscar in a panic. And it was then that the neighbors arrived, saw him holding Reeva's body, and that was when the authorities were called.
The doctor testified during the trial, and he did attempt to save her. Pistorius himself was at the time begging Reeva to stay with him, begging her not to leave him, and they tried CPR, they tried stopping the bleeding, but there was nothing to be done at that stage.
The neighbors are soon replaced by police. A slew of media outlets quickly descends on Oscar's exclusive neighborhood in Pretoria. Within hours, the world hears that the Blade Runner, Oscar Pistorius, has just gunned down his girlfriend.
I will never forget that moment. It was early hours of Valentine's Day. I got a phone call saying that Reeva was dead, and I just sat there and I was like, I'll call you back. And I sat and I sat, and I got back on the phone. I said, what do you mean? My Reeva? And the person on the other line said yes. And I was still in shock. It just did not make sense to me. And I just went cold because, no, she's the last person out of people that I know that deserved to be murdered in cold blood.
I think it was about 7 o'clock in the morning then, breaking the news that Oscar Pistorius had shot dead his girlfriend. And that's when the flood started. The CNNs, Al Jazeera's, Sky News, the world's media had started camping outside this estate in the east of Pretoria.
Many unanswered questions hang in the balance. Was it a horrible mistake or cold-blooded murder? And how could a local hero with such fame and fortune commit such an act with so much to lose?
He was so accustomed to getting past this. He was so accustomed to not suffering any consequences for his actions. And I think he thought the same thing would happen with respect to his girlfriend.
Oscar gives Pretoria police a detailed and very troubling account of what happened.
He claimed while she was in a bathroom. Why would she go to a bathroom with 2 cell phones? It doesn't make sense to me at all. I'm personally of the opinion they had an argument that night. Something just developed in a certain manner, and she went to the bathroom, most probably to phone somebody, to the toilet, as it really actually happened. And when he learned that he's making phone calls, that's when he jumped up and started to fire shots at him. That excuse of certain perpetrators into the premises, quite frankly, is a lot of, as far as I'm concerned, it's nonsense.
Although Oscar's story raises many questions, something else proves to be almost as controversial when officers mishandle crucial crime scene evidence.
Police had not followed proper procedure in terms of securing the crime scene, entering the crime scene without the required protective gear on and so on, contaminating the crime scene.
Pistorius is arrested, but Oscar Pistorius, the suspect, is still treated like a superstar. In an effort to spare him the glaring spotlight of the press, Oscar is hustled to an undisclosed police station.
He was taken to be booked, the usual process, fingerprints, pictures, and so forth. What was different is the fact that everyone wanted to know where he was. There was media trying to follow the police from the house. There was media waiting at the local police station to see if they couldn't get a glimpse of him as he arrived. For instance, a police officer was used as a decoy
Despite his numerous connections to South Africa's elite, Oscar spends the night in jail. The next morning, he stands in front of a magistrate and retells the same tragic tale of mistakenly shooting Reeva. His bail is set at 1 million rands, the equivalent of 113,000 US dollars. Most South Africans would fester in jail, unable to make bond. But for Oscar, the price of freedom might as well be pennies. It is a sum that is easily affordable for the millionaire. Oscar Pistorius, a name that once filled coliseums around the world and inspired millions, now takes center stage plastered across tabloid headlines and magazine covers. Oscar's very public fall from grace is still a mystery, but new information continues to come out daily.
We started to learn more about this individual who was far removed from that composed man you see sprinting down an athletics track and holding up the gold on the podium. It created a very different view of the man, and quite shocking view.
Rumors of Oscar drinking and partying at pubs while out on bail surface in the media, a clear violation of his release. But just as he has received special treatment throughout his life, Oscar remains free. But his reputation is now tarnished, as the Olympian once associated with sports achievement is now compared to another infamous athlete, O.J. Simpson.
And he does have those fans. He has the people who say, you know, what happened was a mistake, we don't blame you. But I think they're definitely in the minority.
Oscar's reputation continues to unravel. He loses close friends and multi-million-dollar sponsors.
The big corporations and the money disappeared. He's lost sponsor after sponsor.
Oakley and Nike distance themselves from the sprinter, causing him to lose millions when he needs the money most.
He won't be earning money the way he did before the shooting. Everything changed that day. He won't be earning money running on an athletics track, and it won't be through sponsors.
But Oscar still has a bank account swelling with money set aside for his defense and other intriguing uses he hopes will curry him favor with the public.
Oscar Pistorius was paying a monthly stipend to the Steenkamp family after the killing. Reeva Steenkamp's parents were relying on her for a monthly bit of money. They had absolutely no income. They were left, without anything. So Oscar Pistorius was paying this particular money.
There we go. Come on.
I'm not sure what it was meant to be, whether it was some sort of apology or whether it was some other arrangement, because Reeva was supporting them financially. And I believe it was 8,000 rand, so that's like, what, a couple hundred US dollars. So, I mean, it wasn't a huge amount, but it was brought up by the state as sort of an indictment on Pistorius's character, saying, oh, look, he's trying to pay off his victim's family.
Oscar remains an enigma. A beloved athlete and inspirational figure who has a dark side and might be guilty of cold-blooded murder. He is forced to stay away from his Pretoria home since it is now a crime scene. So Oscar spends most of his time confined to his Uncle Arnold's mega mansion, a far cry from what an average Joe accused of murder would have access to.
Therefore, we called it mansion arrest instead of house arrest. He was due to live in an apartment on the grounds of the rather large house.
An average suspect charged with murder might still be festering in jail. Oscar, however, is living it up in his uncle's mansion, well aware that his athletic career is in shambles and freedom hangs in the balance. Oscar spares no expense and hires one of the country's best defense advocates, Barry Rue.
Oscar Pistorius had to plow thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars, if not millions, into the very best legal minds that he could hire.
Rue anticipates the state will bring out its A-team for the high-profile case, so he pairs with veteran attorneys Kenny Oldwodge and Brian Weber to form a star-worthy defense team.
He did spend a lot of money on his defense team. Let's look at the different components. From the legal perspective, his counsel, the advocates, no doubt. Advocate Barry Rue is one of the best to counsel in the country. His junior in this particular case was Kenny Oldwodge, also a very respected advocate in the country. So from that aspect, certainly the best money could buy.
The three-headed monster of Rue, Oldwodge, and Weber represent the best and most expensive South Africa has to offer. It costs Pistorius an estimated 100,000 rands, or $7,000 per day, in a country where the average wage is $1,200 per month.
Barry Rue and Kenny Oldwodge are two of our most experienced criminal advocates in the country. And it most certainly gave Pistorius cutting-edge legal defense, and it most certainly gave him one of the best defenses that he could have expected.
The Pistorius trial is set to be the most famous case in South Africa since Nelson Mandela's Rivonia trial back in the early 60s. In order to guarantee a conviction, the government assigns veteran prosecutor Jerry Nell to the case.
He's dealt with politicians' cases. He's dealt with very high-profile figures in the past. And, I mean, he's just one of those lawyers within the National Prosecuting Authority who they bring on for these high-profile, big, important, difficult cases. And, I mean, this was a case that was based entirely on circumstantial evidence, so they needed a very strong prosecutor.
I think there was a massive amount of state resources put into this trial because it was a show trial. It was a media trial, it was a show trial, showcasing our legal system. We had our best prosecuting team, we had expert witnesses, we had people from the South African Police Ballistics Department, as well as people who gave evidence about correctional supervision.
The high-powered defense picks at every facet of the prosecutor's case.
Oh, they challenged every theory that the prosecution had, and they challenged it with big guns, high-paid experts, very sophisticated analysis that was done to try to counter the prosecutor's case, and it worked.
Oscar's carefully crafted public persona will fall apart under the withering attack of prosecutors. Court observers would be shocked at Oscar's surprising emotional breakdown that was unlike any they had ever witnessed. Olympic sensation Oscar Pistorius is charged with the murder of his girlfriend, model Reeva Steenkamp. 1 count of illegal possession of ammunition and 2 counts of firing a weapon in public from unrelated incidents. His trial begins on March 3, 2014, as the media and thousands of onlookers crowd the steps of the Palace of Justice in Pretoria, South Africa. Oscar, who normally walks with a certain arrogance and swagger through flashing cameras, now looks like a man who is fearful and grief-stricken.
Oscar himself refused to interact with the media, and generally he was quite stoic.
It was cliché, but you can only say that it was a media circus. There were so many international members of the media that came into the country. There was a limit on the number of journalists in the courtroom simply because there was just so much space. So we were limited to 40 local journalists and 40 international reporters in the courtroom.
This was dubbed the trial of the century, something I think Americans experienced in the O.J. Simpson trial. We've never seen anything like that in this country.
Since South Africa's jury system was abolished during apartheid, Oscar's fate rests in the hands of the court.
You must bear in mind that our court system is not perfect in this country. We're in fact, a crisis in our criminal justice system. It's not particularly functional right now as a result of corruption, as a result of lack of resources, overcrowding, very, very high levels of crime that leads to long, congested court rolls.
On the first and second days of the trial, witnesses testified that they heard arguing and screams from a female prior to shots being fired from Oscar's condo.
The prosecution painted a very dark picture of an Oscar, this athlete who used his power and authority to intimidate, to harass, and to frighten his girlfriend.
Was Reeva shot in an uncontrollable rage? Prosecutor Jerry Nell describes the night of the shooting in horrific detail and shows graphic photos of Reeva's bullet-ridden body.
There was something brutal about the way Jerry Nell handled it, particularly when he first started the cross-examination and showed the entire courtroom, and it was actually aired on television, a picture of Reeva Steenkamp's head wound. He said, this is what you did to this person. Admit that you are responsible for her death.
Oscar, unable to contain himself, breaks down emotionally, even vomiting in the courtroom.
He was wailing, he was screaming, crying, there's the tears and the snot. Well, I understand he was obviously under massive pressure on the stand, but the way he broke down, no one really saw it coming to that extent. This was full on wailing across the courtroom. You could hear it. It was very uncomfortable.
Clearly, someone of his stature facing years in prison would have to be pretty devastating. So is he crying because she's dead, or is he crying because he's going to be stripped from his life of luxury and in a jail uniform and stuck in a small prison cell?
Experts claim the gunshots fired into the bathroom door that night were pointed downward, causing them to believe that Oscar had his prosthetic legs attached, a claim contrary to Oscar's version of events, implying that he had time to stop, put on his legs, and investigate the so-called source of the noise.
You know, early on in the case, there was some question as to whether he had his prosthetic legs on or not. Now, Oscar claims he didn't. He said he got out of bed and rushed to the bathroom purely on his stumps. But when they analyzed the bullet holes on the bathroom door, it showed a pattern that these had been fired in from a higher angle, which says that perhaps he was wearing his legs, which then gives us the thought that, well, perhaps he had time to think about this and it was calculated. And in fact, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Oscar's defense team, led by the savvy Barry Rue, makes an argument of class, claiming that the rich and famous would reasonably fear a robbery. That argument didn't sit well with the public in crime-addled South Africa.
A lot of Africans took offense to that because, again, here's a man who had every luxury, every privilege, including private security. So he, in the minds of many Africans, was the least likely to be preyed upon because he had the resources to shield himself from criminal activity.
Final arguments begin on August 7th, 2014, 5 months after the trial began. Rue reiterates that Oscar, now a broken man, truly thought Reeva was safe in bed and that he has already paid dearly. The prosecution, however, argues that Oscar should be found guilty of murder and that digital messages between the two tell a tale of a relationship in peril and full of jealous rage.
He was actually on the phone to a former girlfriend whom he had identified on his phone as baby shoes. The police had entirely overstepped this. But at the time, the state's case was that there was this fight between Oscar and Reeva, which ultimately led to him losing his temper and shooting dead his girlfriend. This failure to identify this particular phone call meant that the police never went to this person and questioned her about what was the content of the phone call. It meant that when Oscar Pistorius was on the stand, he was never cross-examined on the contents of that phone call or asked to explain what it was about. Given that was an ex-girlfriend, it might have been relevant to the state's case.
Oscar Pistorius' fate now rests in the hands of the court. Because of Oscar's fame, fortune, and the scope of the case, the pressure is on. On September 12, 2014, the judge and her assessors render a unanimous verdict. Oscar Pistorius, the world's most famous amputee athlete, is found not guilty of premeditated murder and dolus eventualis, known as common murder. Oscar is instead found guilty of culpable homicide, the equivalent of manslaughter, and 1 count of reckless endangerment with a firearm. The other 2 gun-related charges are dismissed.
Judge Masipa didn't apply the correct test for dolus eventualis because she was influenced by all of the other evidence.
Perhaps she was blinded by Oscar's wealth, fame, and athletic accomplishments. And yet, despite Oscar's deep pockets and family wealth, the Steenkamp family announces that they will not seek a civil trial. At sentencing, Oscar's high-priced attorney uses the very disability he overcame to race in the Olympics as a handicap that should lead to leniency.
When you're wealthy and you have the connections that Oscar has, you get special treatment in the criminal justice system. Criminal justice looks very different for the rich and wealthy.
Oscar's money and perhaps the blinding sheen of his fame have helped him dodge a life sentence. But the Blade Runner does receive a prison sentence of 5 years. But even in prison, Oscar receives special dispensation. For inmates in the overcrowded South African prison system, life is violent and hellish.
Well, South African prisons are notoriously overcrowded. It is a problem that we have in this country. The general prison population are housed in rather small cells, but anything between 30 up to 60 people that sleep on these bunk beds that are crammed in. So it's like 3 up bunks that people are sleeping in. So it's confined, and the people be confined in them from about 7 in the evening till 7 in the morning.
However, fellow prisoners accuse Oscar of receiving special treatment, stating he has unprecedented gym access, curtains, and is shielded from the general population.
While he was in prison, a video surfaced that was made of him playing soccer in the yard at the prison with another high-profile prisoner, Radovan Kwetscher. This would not be something that a normal prisoner in general population might be able to do. It seems that the video was taken by cell phone by another prisoner, and it was snuck out of prison that way. Pistorius also had access to gym equipment in prison, so he could train while there. Again, general population would not have access to that sort of equipment.
Why must he get preference? He committed a crime, Sam. Why must he get a preference above other people?
As good as Oscar is purported to have it in prison, his stay is short-lived.
He was sentenced to 5 years, but didn't serve anywhere near the 5 years. He only served a little over 12 months in jail, and then he was released, some kind of home arrest, to his uncle's large compound, again, able to resume his lifestyle, his very wealthy and privileged lifestyle. Not likely to happen to someone without his money, without his relationships, and without his status in this community.
What happens next will only get stranger as prosecutors continue to seek a murder conviction, and Oscar somehow continues to receive special treatment. Oscar Pistorius, once lauded as the Blade Runner and fastest man with no legs, was found guilty of culpable homicide, a charge similar to manslaughter, after he shot and killed his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp. Many across the world believe Pistorius received preferential treatment due to his celebrity status and tremendous resources. Oscar came from a wealthy and powerful South African family and was able to afford an elite team of defense attorneys, experts, and consultants.
There were multiple forensic examinations and testimony by multiple professionals about his medical condition, about his mental health condition, and all of that is reserved to those who are wealthy.
He also received special privileges in prison, due partially to his disability, but mostly to his fame. To add insult to injury, he only served 11 months of his 5-year sentence in prison, spending the rest of the term under house arrest at his uncle's mansion.
He got these things because he was Oscar Pistorius. He was rich, he was famous, he was a celebrity. He was treated differently.
While under house arrest, Pistorius is allowed to leave home from dawn to dusk. He is also able to continue training, even though a future in track and field is improbable at best.
His extended family have significant business interests in a variety of industries. You know, he might be able to be employed in there, but there is a bit of a pride in the Pistorius clan. Oscar Pistorius would want to be able to earn an income for himself. I mean, his agent does foresee a prospect for him in the future, being able to earn an income on his own. But, you know, I suppose we'll have to get there. Once we get there and see how society and the country views Oscar Pistorius once he's served his time.
Oscar's win in court is bittersweet. Not only has he lost his stature in the sports community, but his considerable personal wealth is gone, despite earning millions in endorsements, purses, and investments.
Oscar Pistorius is broke. I think it's been quite clear. It's been submitted numerous times. He's had to sell all his property, his vehicles, and not only has he lost all his assets and whatever money he had, he's lost his means of earning an income. I mean, it was generated on not only his ability on the athletics track, but that celebrity aspect, that role model aspect that he had, that value he gave to brands, which he could leverage to earn money. He's lost it all, and he'll never get that back again.
So, I mean, you cannot take his medals away. You cannot take his world records away. You cannot take what he did for disabled athletes and for young aspiring disabled athletes. You can never take that away. Unfortunately, when you have someone like this on your record, you know, for the rest of your life, that unfortunately is going to be the dominating factor that people talk about. So it will be very sad to lose Oscar Pistorius as the athlete that we have grown to watch and love here in South Africa and worldwide.
And what about the controversial verdict and sentence acquitting Pistorius of murder? The prosecution successfully appeals the judge's culpable homicide verdict. The initial ruling is overturned.
Unlike the United States, where we have this thing called double jeopardy, where you can't be tried on the same charges more than once. So if you're found not guilty, you're not guilty. That's it. It works differently in South Africa.
And Pistorius, his reputation tarnished and his bank account drained, is now convicted of murder. On July 6, 2016, he is sentenced to 6 years in prison.
Let's be honest. 6 years for murdering someone is kind of like being given $100 for running a stop sign. It's remarkable. Anyone else rots away in prison.
It's unbelievable that he only got 6 years for the murder of his girlfriend. Criminal justice looks very different for the rich and wealthy.
For better or worse, Oscar's fall from grace is now complete. There will be no more cheering crowds as he walks into jam-packed stadiums.
I personally don't think that he will have an athletic career in the future. He might decide to write a tell-all book or do something like that might be able to support him or keep him in the public eye. But I personally think his sporting career is ruined.
For years to come, Oscar will be forced to hear the sound of his steel cell doors shutting every night before lights out.
I don't think Oscar Pistorius intended to kill his girlfriend. I don't think that's what happened that particular night. The problem is, after you fire 4 shots blindly through a door, it's too late. And that is the man's regret, and that is something